All right, hey, greetings, folks. Welcome to week 6. This is going to be lecture 2. I got cut off right at the end, but that was all right because we were almost done with that particular lecture. So what we're going to explore in this particular lecture is the idea of creativity. And I want to talk to us a little bit about how left brain our operations as Christians typically are in the West. We are infatuated with rational and logical and systematic approaches to our problems and then ultimately to ministry. We create systematic theology because we believe in the necessity of systematizing our theological articulation so that it fits in this neat, tidy package. We provide and manage resources and tools and systems, which we're going to talk about systems in lecture 3. We manage these systems because we believe that if we can engineer certain things in certain ways, we will get certain outcomes. That goes back to what we talked about in week 1 and week 2 about the nature of how modernity shaped our imaginations and how we started to believe that everything could be managed and built to create a predictable set of outcomes. We bought into this efficiency mechanism. We bought into the power of programming. We bought into the power of centralization and staffing and organizing churches around corporate structures. And again, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I hope you get that from me in the midst of the generosity that I seek to offer. God has used a number of different things in a number of different ways in a number of different times. But what I'm suggesting to us is that what got us to where we are will not get us to where we need to go into the future. And I want to keep that in mind for us as we move forward. So we've been incredibly left brain, rational, logical, cognitive, and I want us to think in terms of what does it look like for the church to move from left brain to right brain. I think what we need in this time of the church is the infusion of creativity and imagination. I think one of the challenges that we have is that we don't recognize the importance of artistry and poetry. Let me explain what I mean here. We just assume people have a picture in their mind of what we need to get to, and we just build systems based upon the assumptions we have about what people believe the church should be. And I believe that what we have to do is engage the right portion of the brain. And we have to help paint pictures. We have to help draw people into these beautiful and imaginative visions about the kind of impact that we can have, where we begin to invite people to engage a part of their being that they're not typically inclined to engage. So let me give you an example of this. And this is what I think I mean as we talk about the kind of creativity and the innovation and the way in which to foster a right-brained kind of operation within the process of our church, where we begin to value the opportunity to stir up people's abilities to dream and think about what could be. I was doing a series through the book of Nehemiah, and I love that story, but I got to the part in Nehemiah, and we all do this. We paint pictures through the ways in which we preach, or some of us do. Some of us are even left-brained in the way we preach, and so we're only ever appealing to people's logic or reason, or we give them 3 principles, or we give them 4 steps, or whatever. But I do think one of the powers that we have within the Scriptures is the ability to invite people into story, have encounters with the story, where it fosters and fuels imagination. That's the power of a good story in literature, is that it does something to us that simply just giving us a list will not do for us. And so I was inviting them into the story of Nehemiah, and I had in a very tactile way built a wall up on the stage, and there were pieces all falling apart, and it was with cinder blocks, and some of the cinder blocks were broken, and some of them fallen down. And I was describing the wall of Jerusalem and how Nehemiah had gone back to fix the wall, and I talked about when he got back to Jerusalem, how he didn't even tell anybody at first why he was doing what he was doing, and he jumped upon a horse and he started to ride through the ruins of the city and through the walls. And when the horse couldn't go any further, he gets down and he continues to walk through the ruins, and he's trying to assess the damage and determine and recognize the brokenness, because he doesn't know what to fix unless he can identify what brokenness looks like. And then I invited my church to think about and imagine what the brokenness in their community was, what the brokenness that they have witnessed as they ride through their cities. And I said to them, you've grown up in these cities, you know these cities far better than I know them, and what does it look like for you? I want you to put yourself on the horse right now, and I want you to imagine yourself riding through the city. And what do you see? What layers of brokenness and pain and systemic struggle do you begin to see in this community that you have called home? I said, now, as a part of this, under your seat, you're going to find a sticky note. And I want you to write what you saw, what you imagined as you rode through the ruins of your city. I want you to write it on there. And then I want you to come and I want you to put that on the rocks. And people began to take that call seriously. And I expected maybe 10, 15 people. Many of the folks in our congregation, I don't want to say everyone, but a good large number of the people in our congregation began to come flooding forward, because now they were participants. They were actively engaged. And then we began to say, okay, what would it look like? Can you imagine what your city would look like, your community would look like, if we began to take seriously the call to respond to some areas of brokenness that we find here in the ruins of this city? And now it wasn't simply just giving them a 5-point plan to follow. We were calling upon their imaginations and their creativity. I think we need to help people imagine things, paint pictures, develop a sense of what things could look like if God were to work in ways that only God could. And I think we need to draw upon the power of story that engages people, draws them. I think it's the way we preach and the way we teach. And so I want to encourage you to think about the ways in which you help people frame creativity and imagine. We are co-creators with God. We've been given this incredible capacity to imagine the opportunities that God has to radically transform. I think one of the things that I love so much about the scriptures is that it's not just plain prose, right? It draws upon poetry and prophetic literature, which all ultimately uses analogies and metaphors and similes and other literary devices that are evocative. I love, one of my favorite passages is in Isaiah. And again, this is about evoking imagination. It talks about how God is going to do a new thing, and he's going to burst forth streams in the wasteland. And I talk to my congregation, he's going to turn the wastelands into water parks. What does it look like to believe that the dry, weary, parched places of this world can experience the fresh outpouring of God's grace and Spirit in ways that break through the dry, weary land and create and cultivate this new possibility and this new hope? That's in Isaiah. We've got this literature to draw from. When you think about what Jesus did, is he taught stories and he invoked imaginations, and he said the kingdom of God is not like a 5-point plan. The kingdom of God is like a fisherman that tosses in his net in the water. The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of God is like a dude who's casting seed. The kingdom of God is like, and it's evocative. We need to think about the ways we teach and we preach. Are we evoking? Are we just simply giving people information that they hope? Because we're convinced in the West, we're convinced as left-brainers, if you can just give people the right amount of information, the right amount of information will change their behaviors. I'm not convinced that is true. I think we are whole beings, and I think what imagination and creativity does is it invites and it evokes and it draws people in, and it begins to stir in them this capacity to see transformation happening. There's this great story of a community that was trying to reimagine what to do with this piece of property that was down by the river. and they had proposal after proposal, and different people had submitted projects that they could do, but there was very little movement because it was run down and it was broke down, and people just they couldn't conceptualize how are we going to get from this broke down eyesore of an area along the river into something meaningful, until an artist got to work, and the artist began to draw a picture of this bustling street right up bumped up against the waterway, and there was people walking, and there was cafes open, and there was shops, and there were children playing, and there were dogs walking, and it was as the picture was drawn and given to the people who were in charge of putting together the projects and putting together the proposals, that something began to shift because they began to see a picture. That's the power of Revelation 21 and 22. Revelation 21 and 22, the power of that is that it gives us a picture. A new Jerusalem, a new heaven and a new earth, water that runs through the heart of the city, that provides sustenance for the trees along the banks, with leaves that bring healing to the nations. We don't need a sun anymore because God will be our light. It's a picture that's painted that evokes in us this sense of hope and imagination. So let me ask you again. If we're going to be a movement, it can't be just simply a left brain activity of writing up the right set of proposals or having the right set of points or the right 5-year plan. What kind of pictures are you painting? What kind of ideas are you evoking in the life of your congregation? Have you turned the Spirit loose to draw us into the co-creative capacity of humanity with God, and to imagine a future that is different than the present, a community that looks different than the way it looks now? I want to challenge you to embrace the capacity of the right side of the brain, the creative, the artistic, the poetic side of the brain, to evoke and inspire opportunities moving forward.